Hello, crypto world. Welcome to the Chart Historian. My name is Justin, and on this channel, I delve deep into crypto charts, exploring chart structures, fractals, and patterns. In this video, I'm going to talk about XRP. It is my belief that XRP is nearing a breakout point. I'll present my case to you so you can see what I'm talking about and what I believe is coming down the pike. Now, I am going to start with the big picture. So this is a zoomed out picture of the XRP chart. Now, it is my belief that XRP has a repetitive macro structure. This is important to understand. It is the centerpiece of my technical analysis. This is a unique look at the XRP chart. You're not going to find this type of technical analysis anywhere else. So this repetitive macro structure consists of three substructures. That is a bull run, a decline, and a sideways range-bound time. These three structures, they play out over and over again. They play out on different scales. So this one played out on a much larger scale than this one, but as we can see, it has a bull run, a decline, and a sideways range-bound time. This sequence of events, the bull run followed by a decline, followed by a sideways range-bound time, always happens in this order. So over here, we see a bull run, a decline, and we're working through a sideways range-bound time. We're almost done this sideways range-bound time. Notice how this bull run did not go higher than this bull run. Structurally, this is a bull run. Bull runs have a repetitive theme to them. I have a series of videos where I deep dive into this repetitive structure that XRP bull runs have. It's on my Patreon. I'll put a link to that in the description of this video. This brings up an important point though, because this bull run is shorter than this one, and that is because whenever a structure repeats, the timing, height, and depth, those will always be unique and original. It's really important that you understand that. That can open the door for differences in height when it comes to bull runs. We see vastly different heights here, but it's all the same structure. Differences in depths, as well as differences in timing. So even though those differences persist, the basic idea repeats. Although because it has timing, height, and depth differences, it can lend to novelty in the repeating structure. So let's dive into this sideways range-bound time because that is where we are at. So it is my belief that this structure is also a repetitive structure. This structure, the sideways range-bound time, is a part in the chart that really confuses most analysts. It just seems chaotic. It doesn't seem ordered. It's just complete disjointed. But actually, it is a repetitive structure, and I will show you. So in the first fractal, price moves up and moves back down in part A, and then in part B, it goes flat. Sometimes part B will arch down. We see that repeat over here in this fractal one. So in part A, price moves up, it moves back down, and then part B, it went flat. In fractal 2, there's three waves, wave A, wave B, and wave C. We see that over here once again, wave A, wave B, and wave C. In fractal 3, price moves up to a peak, which is part A, and then crashes, which is part B, or declines, and then it recovers, does a smaller correction, and then it goes into the bull run. So over here in this third range-bound fractal, we have part A where price moved up to a peak, it then declined. This one wasn't a nasty crash like this one was. It declined to a low, which is part B. It then has recovered, and it is now doing the smaller correction before the bull run. So notice how these functions between this fractal 3 and this fractal 3 are the same, however, it looks very different. This is a great example of the idea repeating the functions, but the way it looks is unique. So this is another important thing to understand about this type of technical analysis. This is an analysis of the functions of fractals, not the appearance of how they look. So what I am studying, what I am looking for, is certain functions to repeat. There's another key thing to understand about this final third range-bound fractal that I have not brought up in my previous videos, but it's really important to understand. These two other fractals in this range-bound time, they're much simpler fractals. Part A where it moves up and moves down, and then part B where it goes flat and sideways, or sometimes arches down. That leaves little room for novelty, really, when compared to the third range-bound fractal. Fractal 2 has 3 waves. Sure, it's going to look different every single time, as we see here, but the 3 waves are easy to count and detect. This third range-bound fractal is very big in some ways. It moves up to a peak. Look how long it took for the peak to come on this third range-bound fractal compared to this one. Look how high this one went compared to this one. Look at the declines from part A to part B. This one was fast and furious. This one was a gradual decline that included waves on the way down to the low. So this fractal is much, much harder to track as far as functions and what it's doing as it's playing out than, say, this one. For instance, when this moved up to a peak, sure, this is part A, but then it moves down. Well, is this the low? Is this part B? And until this happens, this is the low. So you got to run with this being the low. But then what does it do? It moves up. Well, yeah, that makes sense. It's the recovery after the low. But then it continues to fall to a new low. Then you have to reset things and say, nope, this is how it's playing out. This is the low. So that vagueness in the functions makes this third range-bound fractal much harder to track than these other two fractals, and it has been the case as this has played out. This has been a humbling experience tracking this fractal compared to these other two fractals. These other ones were much simpler to track. What we can do, and this is kind of comes with some downsides, is we can compare what is happening today to previous third range-bound fractals. We were doing that with this one, but we can even go further. We can copy and paste certain fractals. If we go further back, let's go back to over here. Okay, so this is that part of the chart. This really starts from the beginning and it goes to 2017. XRP starts with a sideways range-bound time. I go into these structures in my previous videos. You're welcome to go check those out. Starts with a sideways range-bound time, goes into a bull run, goes into a decline, goes into another small sideways range-bound time. Structurally, these are all the same. Goes into a bull run, goes into a decline, goes into a much larger sideways range-bound time. Well, if we were to examine this sideways range-bound time and compare this third range-bound fractal to what's happening today, before we do that, I just want to point out what this one does. So this one, here's part A, price moves up, moves back down, and then here is a good example of it arching down versus going flat. And then in fractal 2, we have the 3 waves, wave A, wave B, and wave C. These waves, they're not as pristine as you would want them to be, but they are 3 waves, and they meet those functions that we are looking for. So in fractal 3, part A moves up to a peak, it then declines. This decline was similar to what's happening on today's chart to a low, which is part B. It then recovers, does a small correction, and then goes into the bull run. Well, let's copy this fractal and compare it to today's chart. Now, I will have to adjust this fractal for today's timing, height, and depth as it's playing out larger on today's chart. Okay, so I did this on my last video. I compared these two. So this gray fractal right here is essentially this structure just stretched out to match the timing. However, if we zoom in closer, we could see that even that is not a very good match, as parts of this structure play out differently. So for instance, this blue box, which is starting at the beginning and going to the peak, which is part A, we see that repeat over here. This time it took longer to play out, but there are those similarities where it goes flat and then it moves up eventually to a peak here, and in the process there's these waves. Now, here is a really important thing to understand. We're comparing one iteration of the third range-bound fractal to another. Yet we know that every time it plays out uniquely. So this comes with inherent risks of being stuck expecting today's chart to play out like it did in 2016 and 17, when we know that it's going to be unique. So this is where I have in the past got myself into trouble thinking, oh man, it's doing this and then it's likely going to do this, but it doesn't do it. It does something different. So it's important that when doing this comparison, we don't latch on to something of the past. We need to remain flexible and open for today's structure to play out in a unique way, as it always does. Having said that, let's continue with the similarities to 2016/17. So in 2016/17, it did this decline. This decline took a long time, or it was a much larger percentage of the fractal compared to today's chart. This one was much shorter. It does the same thing though. It declines after it does this part right here, this purple box, which is over here. Now, there is some differences here. So in this purple box, this whole structure right here was essentially a bottoming out structure where it completes the decline, it bottoms out, and then it moves up into the final smaller correction before going into the bull run. Well, on today's chart, it's a little different. This bottoming out structure has played out much higher. It has moved up. In fact, I venture to say that this is the recovery off the low, which is part B, and this is the smaller correction, where in 2017, this was a smaller correction. So the reason why I believe that is that it has moved up into the zone of these previous peaks, which is typical of the recovery after the low, or part B, as we see over here. So it came to a low, which was part B. It then moved up and did the small correction. This move up was similar in range, or in this rough zone of these previous peaks. And if we go back to some of these other ones, it does the same thing. So price moves up to a peak, which is part A, it then crashes, which is part B, it then recovers back into this zone here, does that small correction, and then moves into the bull run. So we have a long history of this smaller correction roughly taking place somewhere in this upper zone here. So it is my belief, because it is in this area that it should be, that it is likely the small correction, and then this part right here will be something different. I expect this to materialize, or at least I'm open to it. I don't know how it will look. Now, if this turns into some really large correction, and it is clear that this is not the small correction, but this is, then I will say, well, yeah, this is the small correction. But as of now, the way this is playing out, this correction here is in that zone, which leads me to believe that this is a small correction, and this will just be maybe a smaller pullback, if there is any, before moving into the bull run. So I cleaned things up a bit. This is only the fractal that we are currently working on. This is that small correction. It's followed this overall structure from 2016/17 fairly well. So we're close. It is my belief that it is going to begin to move up relatively soon. Hence, we are nearing a breakout point. There you have it, folks. That is how I see XRP playing out. We are very near the bull run. I have been making many videos saying that as of late, but it is the truth. This is not financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor. But if you did enjoy this video, it'd be much appreciated if you hit that thumbs up button. And if you're not yet a subscriber, I recommend hitting that subscribe button. I'll put the link to my Patreon in the description of this video. I also have a Discord connected to that Patreon where we discuss XRP and other cryptos. I'm so glad you caught this video. I hope you catch my next one. Have a nice day, and bye for now.